So I'm Sonia Ancoli-Israel. I am currently a professor emeritus in the Department of Psychiatry at the University of California, San Diego. And I've been at UCSD for about 45 years. I started out in psychophysiology and biofeedback. I did my undergraduate at Stony Brook, University of New York at Stony Brook, working with Lester Femi, who at the time was doing biofeedback work. I went to the University of California, San Francisco to continue work in biofeedback with Joe Camilla, who was the very first president of the original APSS, which was then the Association for the Psychophysiological Study of Sleep. And while at UCSF, I had to pick 4 areas of specialty within psychophysiology. And so one of them was sleep. And I studied with Bob Feinberg, Erwin Feinberg, who we just recently lost. And he was my first mentor, my first introduction to sleep. And then I moved down to San Diego for personal reasons and went looking for a job. I went first to see Vern Johnson, who is also one of our founders of the field of sleep, who was working at the Navy. But he had just hired someone else, and so I went to visit with Dan Kripke at UCSD and the VA. And Dan said to me, well, I have no money, but I have a desk and a phone. So sit down and write a grant. And I did. Just at that time, the NIH, actually it was NIMH at that point, had come out with an RFA, a request for applications in sleep and aging. This is 1978. We knew almost nothing about sleep and aging at that point. So I wrote a grant to look at the prevalence of sleep apnea and periodic limb movements in sleep in older adults. Again, we knew nothing about this. We didn't have a Terry Young or Susan Redline then. We hadn't done any epidemiological work within sleep. We thought we were doing an epidemiological study because we ended up studying 600 people. Now, of course, that's nothing. But anyway, that grant got funded, and sort of, as they say, the rest is history. So that's how I got started in the area of sleep and aging. I was one of the first in the field to do that. So that was the beginning. So Dan Kripke was really, Bob Feinberg and Dan Kripke were the first. Dan trained me in a lot of clinical sleep medicine. I don't remember how many years after I got started, Chris Gillen moved to UCSD, and he was a wonderful colleague. You know, Chris did much of the early work and was a wonderful man. He's one of the few that was, I think, president of both SRS and the Academy. And he really moved our field forward. Unfortunately, we have lost him as well. But so I worked with Chris. I met Ruth Benka early on because she came and did a sabbatical with Chris at UCSD. So that's when I first got to work with her and meet her. We didn't have a lot of other sleep people at the time at UCSD, but many of our students are now makers and shakers within the field. So Jennifer Martin was one of my graduate students. Phil Gehrman was one of my graduate students. Cleet Kushida trained with me. Michael Grandner was one of my graduate students. Tricia Haynes. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. And I'm really proud. I feel that's part of my legacy, is that so many of my students are now faculty in their own right and people who are making an impact themselves within the field of sleep. Yeah. So, well, let's start with the Academy. I actually was involved a little bit. I was never on the board of the Academy, but I was actually the Academy representative to the program committee early on for many years. It's when Tom Roth was the head of the program committee. And I forget how or why that happened, but I was the Academy representative. And but I was always more involved with SRS. I was more of a researcher than a clinician. I mean, I saw patients in my career as well, but I was really more of a researcher. And so I joined the board of the SRS. I actually, when I first started being involved, there was no SRS and Academy. It was all one organization. As I say, it was the original APSS. And then, we split into the SRS and the ASDC. It started out as that way. And I was involved in those as the two organizations evolved. I was on the board of the SRS. I became president of the SRS. And I think it was at that point that the original Rechtschaffen and Kales manual was being modified to the new Academy scoring rules. And because of my position in SRS, I got to be on the committee with which did the first revision. I lost track of how many revisions there are now, but so I was involved with the first revision of the scoring manual. Larry Epstein was involved. That's how we first met and worked together. So Rechtschaffen and Kales was really the Bible for scoring sleep records, PSG records. But it was felt that it needed to be updated. It was certainly old. The placements of electrodes for doing PSGs was changing. And with all the new sleep disorders being recognized and becoming much more important, it was felt that it was time to have a new scoring manual. And it was a tedious, long, but very careful process. There was a lot of vetting. There was a lot of research that had to go into what was the right way and what were the new criteria that needed to be met. And I think we came out with a really good product in the end. And as it should be, it continues to evolve. As we learn more about sleep disorders, it continues to evolve to meet all the new needs of the field. I interacted with the Stanford group, but I never worked up there. I never trained up there. I knew Bill Dement well. I knew Christian Guilleminault. As I said, Clete Kushida trained with me. I was on advisory board to some of Bill's grants. I mean, I think I started in the field, first of all, when there were very few women. There was Roz Cartwright and Mary Carskadden and me early on, Barbara Jones, a few other people, but there were very few of us. And there were very few people in the field in general, and so we all knew each other. I met Nathaniel Kleitman. I have this wonderful picture when I think it was at one of the early meetings that was at Stanford, and I have a picture with Nathaniel Kleitman, which hangs on the wall in my office. So because I started early on, I got to meet all these wonderful people who really started our field. These were all giants in our field, and to have the opportunity, not so much to work with them, but to know them. I used to be invited up to Stanford to give talks. I'll give you an anecdote. My daughter went to Stanford and was taking Bill Dement's famous sleep class. And I thought, I'm going to sneak in and just, sit in on his class. So I sort of sat in the middle of this huge auditorium. I thought, okay, he's not going to notice me. I can just listen. And Bill gets up and he's giving his talk and he's teaching. And all of a sudden he turns to me and says, Sonia, what do you think? And I thought, well, so much for hiding from him. You couldn't hide from Bill. So that was my interaction with the people at Stanford. I mean, we have a lot of great people in California who do sleep. Stanford, of course, was the start of clinical sleep medicine in so many ways. So I was very fortunate to be able to interact with them. When I was president, I think it was around 2005 when I was president of the SRS. And I was very fortunate because at that point, the SRS and the Academy got along really well. There are times in our history when that wasn't the case. In fact, when Chris Gillen was president, he was one of the people that really helped mend some of the issues that had been going on between the two societies. But when I was president, we got along really well. So we did a strategic plan at that point to decide where we needed to move forward as a sleep research field. We were trying to make sure that our basic scientists still felt welcome. The field was becoming more and more clinical, had become more and more clinical. And so it was important to keep the basic scientists involved. I've always felt that the researchers and the clinicians have to keep talking to each other because that's how the field moves forward. And so we worked hard at making sure that everyone felt invited and part of everything that we were doing. So as a researcher, and particularly the research that I did was clinical-based research. I was never a basic scientist. So I always felt it was really important to involve clinicians in anything that I did in terms of my research. So coming to meetings, working with the academy, it was only by talking to clinicians who weren't doing research but were really seeing the patients. If I wanted to do research on clinical aspects of sleep medicine, I needed to interact with the people that were seeing the patients day in, day out. And that helped inform the research. And it's one of the reasons I always felt it was so important for researchers and clinicians to meet together, to interact, to talk, because that's where the ideas stemmed from. That's where the design for the research came from. You had to have the interaction of the two. It was very important. And that's why it's so important, and always has been, for the Academy and the SRS to work together. And that's the only way the field can continue to move forward. I have always believed that in order to know where you're going, you have to know where you came from. And one of the things that sort of scares me the most is that our younger colleagues know almost nothing about our history. I talk to younger colleagues, and many of them have no idea who Nathaniel Kleitman was, who Alan Rechtschaffen was. And I think you have to know that history. You have to know where we came from and what's already been done in order to really move the field forward. One of the things that I did at the SRS that I'm very proud of, and I think not enough people know about, is we have a series of video recordings with the founders of our field. I think it's called Conversations with Our Founders. And I encourage everyone to go to the SRS website and listen to those videos. We have interviews with Bill Dement, with Al Rechtschaffen. We have a conversation between Al Rechtschaffen and Bill Dement that gives you so much about our history. Peter Horry, I got to work with Peter Horry for many, many years, another founder of our field. We have an interview with him, with Chris Gillen, it's a long, long list of people. And if our younger colleagues would go and at least listen to that, if not go and read those original papers, you would learn so much about our field and understand where we came from. And as I said, that helps inform all of us on where we should keep going. We have to know our history. It's hard for me to tell their stories. It was their stories to tell, but there's so many anecdotes. How Bill Dement got into the field. He knocked on Nathaniel Kleitman's door and said, I may be interested in sleep. And Nathaniel Kleitman said, did you read my book? And Bill said, no. And Nathaniel Kleitman said, go read my book and then come back. And so Bill did. The stories of how their first sleep studies were done in New York City on Riverside Drive. And I'm not sure I can tell the story correctly, but Bill Dement was studying the New York Rockettes from, I forget the name of the theater now, where the famous Rockettes who would, throw their feet, their legs into the air. But all the studies, of course, were done at night, and the doorman in the building was wondering why all these young women kept coming up to the apartment to visit Bill Dement. There's so many anecdotes and stories from all our founders. They're great stories. Go listen to the recordings. So let me say a word about what we're doing now. So Mary Carskadden, who's editor of the journal Sleep Advances, decided to start a section of the journal called Living Legends, because we have lost so many of our early founders, we decided it was time to get those that are still around to write about their careers so that we document, again, that history of where the field started. So I encourage everyone to go to the Sleep Advances website and read. There are about 5 articles so far. We are reaching out to as many as we can, as fast as we can, to have them write about how they got into the field, what impact they had, what their legacy is. So there'll be many, many more of these articles, and I encourage everyone to go read them. I think that one of the most important for me as a woman in the field of sleep medicine, one of the important things that I see now that I'm so proud of is how many other women there are. We started out as a minority, right, as in many fields, and now there are so many women. I mean, we have wonderful men in the field too, but we've always had wonderful men in the field. So now have women who are impactful in their own right and who are doing wonderful research and are being recognized for the work that they're doing. I feel like we've now become equal with the men, which is so important. And so I'm very proud in whatever small role I may have played in helping that happen as a early female in the field. It's something we can all be very proud of. The AASM has done a fabulous job in educating our sleep clinicians and researchers. The amount of funding that has gone to help young investigators move their research forward, to teach clinicians about all different aspects of sleep medicine. And by doing all that the Academy has done, it has so much helped move our field so far forward and actually make it a real field that stands on its own. It is no longer just a little part of other aspects of medicine. And I think it's really because of all the work that the Academy has done that our field is where it is today.